So earlier you mentioned natural versus man-made salt chambers, and I get into discussions about this kind of philosophy all the time, where people tend to think that, for example, like a sensory deprivation float, which I have here. I'm very fortunate. I've been into that for a few years. People say, can't you just recreate that by going into the ocean at night and just floating in the ocean? But it's totally different, right? And I think people tend to think like natural is always better, but I mean, to get super concentrated doses of things, I think something like a salt room is going to be much different than these caves, right?
Yeah, I mean, going into underground places, it really is what's called speleotherapy, which is more about cave-like. When you go 100 meters underground, the barometric pressure, the humidity, the temperature, the drafting of the salt particles, very different. And it was in Europe where in the 1970s, the first halo generator was created. And thus that's what created the above ground man-made salt rooms. And they started to design them to make them look like they were the hollowed out chambers underground. And that's where you started to get these salt on the walls and certain looks. And that's when I got into the business and we started utilizing different decor elements of being in a relaxation room. A lot of spas have these, meditation rooms, relaxation rooms and such. But to your point, when you start looking at technology and you look at science, and, for a lot of people, they haven't heard the word biohacking, you start looking at how can we really leverage things that are in nature. And nature is a great source, but nature is also suffering, right? Climate change, wildfires, what's going into the air that infect us is a whole other conversation. But creating a way that people can get this as a benefit and a treatment is, over in Europe, in many countries, it's considered that a medical treatment in which health insurance pays for it. So when you start looking at our insurance model, just turn on the evening news at the national time slot and watch what commercials they are. Pharmaceutical companies. It's about allergies, asthma, COPD. It's a big business. And people, the medical market is all about getting people in a certain time framework addicted to needing a steroid inhaler and such. But if you can naturally recreate some of the same symptoms, I mean, just last week on national news, there were studies that were released and talked about how meditation is as effective as medication for anxiety and stress. Well, we knew that. You talk about sensory deprivation in a tank, very different than floating, especially I've been to the Dead Sea recently, and it's a cool experience, but it's not the same input. And that's where I think you're starting to see the cross between what biohacking is and leveraging science and technology in a way that really supports our wellness and well-being.